Okay, buddy, this is Jeff, and I'm gonna deal with this language and gender kind of topic, and this keeps coming up a lot. And this is not just over the past couple of years. I think I've written about this like 15 years ago in like Multilingual magazine at a point in time, and I've probably blogged on this at different times too, probably like at prodigy.com, and I'm sure I have because I've talked about gender actually in gender of nouns in English. So all this whole gender debate is a lot around language reform. It comes up quite often, um, like in France and Spanish and German, French and German. I mean, okay, I'll give an example. Back in college, when I was doing my second bachelor's degree in French, and I was taking advanced French courses all day long because I did it in 1 year. I did a bachelor's degree in French in 1 year after a second one. So I get up some background noise. I'm in a restaurant, McDonald's, just having a coffee, and I'm here. And so there's a little bit of background noise, but I get better lighting here, and it's better than do it in the car where I do these vlog videos like I'm on the road, so I'm just driving around. So I have an idea. I want to stop and just talk about it. So I want to deal with this point because that's on LinkedIn. It's a LinkedIn question. Um, I remember. So I was in college, my second bachelor's degree, and I wanted to keep up with my Spanish, but I didn't want to kill my my grade point average by taking the class I have to do work in on top of it. And I had taken Spanish in high school too and stuff, so it was no big deal. But I just want to kind of audit the class, but I didn't want to audit. So I took a first year Spanish class um, in during my second bachelor's degree in French, just for fun. Okay, it was for fun. Just kind of you always, even in betting class, and I actually wanted to see how the teacher, because I was doing a master's degree, I was working on getting a teaching degree in French too, so I wanted to see how others were teaching to beginner students, because this is with the folks I was teaching as well and going to be teaching. So I wanted to see how they were doing it too, and even other languages. So I like doing this. This is fun. Um, but so as a Spanish teacher, and and I remember at one day, one of the women said, why is it in Spanish that you have to say ellos instead of ellas for the plural? The masculine plural for a group of males, rather than the feminine plural for a group of females. If there's only one man in the group, of a group of women, like 20 women and one man, you have to say ellos. And the Spanish teacher, his response really, he says, hey, it's my native language. I wasn't there when we invented this thing. When it got this got invented, he says, not my problem. I'm here to teach you how it works today. Okay. And that's just the way it is. And he just blew it off. And he said, hey, just deal with it, folks. This is the way it is. And I thought about that, and I thought, this is all about language choice, language policy. So I want to say that language is never by itself an isolated thing. It's always surrounded by politics and by power and by who's in power, and that's sometimes education. So there's always a language policy is actually determined by the educational people in education that determine all this, what you're going to teach in schools and stuff and learn in schools. Whereas language, that's written education, right? Written content. That's not native tongue, mother tongue, because mother tongue is always the spoken language. Okay, so a lot of the written language factors impact how we do language choice and spoken, because it's the system of where we live, and it's in a whole ecosystem. So these are not like silos that kind of live in them by themselves. Then you deal with linguistics and how you study language, and then I want to, sociolinguistics aspects, the aspects of doing the linguistics. Not my master's and my doctoral work are on sociolinguistics with loan words, studying loan words in other languages. So this is like I totally understand this, but you got to look at all different factors: the linguistic factors, the pronunciation factors, the phonology factors, the syntactic factors, the semantic factors, and the sociolinguistic factors, the sociolective factors, the individual choice factors, group factors, community factors, everything. I mean, this is all kind of part of, and then how, like I said, the administration of the country and how they determine all that. So I got noise again, but I just have to deal with this. Lots of kids here today. I don't know why. But I think that the key thing here is that this whole language gender topic of nouns, this is usually about nouns, if they're masculine or feminine or neuter or some other flavor, and this can all, I don't want to, we can get into like men and women and the whole transgender topic and LGBT and all that. I mean, that's another on top of it thing, which is now kind of getting getting the result of it now, and how do we treat people, and how do we how is inclusive, and it's getting to the inclusive language thing. But from some languages, it's like there are even gets a little more complicated because, and I'm going to get to it here in a minute of how we could maybe do this of dealing with nouns. Okay, but it's not just always a binary thing of just masculine and feminine of nouns, like whatever language, like you know, in mouse in the mouse in the mouse actually in French is a feminine, considered a feminine object, but the mouse pad is a masculine object. Okay, so and so, and I might have, I actually have, oh yeah, I got it right here. Cool. So I got my computer sitting in front of me is a masculine object, but I actually have my tablet here, which I call it, is a feminine object. They're both computer kind of things, right? So this is, there are no rules to all that. So they kind of come as they go, and it takes time, and as things go on, and it's all creating new words. You got to kind of decide it in terminology. You kind of, when you invent new words and vocabulary and stuff, it comes with time too, and that fits into history. So, and actually, there are some cases, and I will say, where it's really interesting is when you have a word like photocopier, the print machine at work or at home. In French, it's either masculine or feminine, depending on how you see it. So you can have a masculine photocopieur, but you can have a feminine photocopieuse, because it depends if you see it as a device, which is masculine, appareil, or if you see it as a machine, which is feminine. And so there are actually two different words that actually have two different genders for the same object. Now, people can debate this, saying, yeah, this is the correct word. No, I've heard both entire 32 years I lived here, depending on who is talking, okay? So no one can tell me, no, you got to do this. Now, this is all about language choice again, and perspective, and actually how you see the object. So this is really interesting from a sociolinguistic perspective, but even beyond just sociolinguistics, because then you're getting into like cognitive linguistics too. Because how do people see the objects? Or how do they see whatever you want to call these things, okay? Nouns are always people, places, or things in general. So these are objects. Let's just call them that to simplify all this. Now, you do have some language, and I'm not going to talk about just French and Spanish. I'm just French, Spanish, and English. I'm going to come to the English one too. And I've got a bunch of these anecdotes because these are important to kind of to consider. There are languages that have like 10,000, and then we need the conjugations. There are some languages like Central America have 10,000 conjugations and one verb. So which one do you want? I mean, now it's not like people are running around doing 10,000 conjugations with their mind all the time, but it kind of depends on the number of factors of that verb and the context of that verb and how it's done and how it's being used and whatever. And I don't want to get into full semantic analysis here of things because I'd be going all day. But there are some languages too that have, like, how do you deal with the we, which is considered a first person plural. But is that first person plural inclusive or non-inclusive? It says that, is this a we where I'm included, or is this a we as a group where I'm not really talking about me being in the group, but we're just talking a group in general? Which in some language they do that as actually a third person singular, kind of like Spanish and French do the third. But in another language they do this as a first person plural. depending if it's just considered to be non-inclusive, where I'm not considered, we're just saying us in general. Whereas us with me in it, that's two different things. And then you have to decide, is there a masculine, I don't want to say masculine, but this masculine feminine kind of thing, okay? Now I want to get away from this masculine feminine because that's what I want to kind of deal with here in a couple minutes, of how to maybe approach this and find a way to deal with, how do we deal with this inclusive thing, or how do we deal with the masculine feminine debate? And that's kind of what I get to. But I'm giving some examples because this is important to see how languages have evolved, and we got them today. Now, what do you do with today and this whole debate issue? Okay, which it's a lot of this is over power of the history. Okay, people in power, and usually happen to be men in power, but not always. There have been women in power. There have been cases. I mean, look at the whole thing of Alexandria, okay, and all that. And you've got Cleopatra, who had a lot of influence over what his name is, Mark. Boy, I'm not, I got to think of the comic books and stuff and all the things. Was all these the Asterix movies. I can remember that because that's where I can remember some of these things from. I know the history too, but there's kind of thing, read the Roman Empire stuff. That's where you read the books. There are books, Life in Rome and stuff. I mean, the Roman Empire, I read those too. So it's not like I just read comic books and watch movies, but I do. But it's I'm not a historian in Roman Empire history, but I've read enough about it and interest. I've got one book on my shelf up at home too. That's I read like 2 years ago. So it's just the dates and stuff and all that. I don't remember the exact dates. Kind of generic stuff. So you do have some examples of that, and actually get women in power in other things. You can see women in power in other situations, like in Egypt, and Egypt before that. So I'm talking the Egypt of the whole pyramid times. Not just Alexandria there, and then maybe you consider, like in the Bible. Hey, the Bible had judges that were women. There were women that Deborah, if I remember off the top of my head, there were several that were women. So there have been cases actually in historical literature where there have been women, women in power. And then if you look at some of the mythology of like Greek mythology too, you've got women gods or goddesses. I'm sorry. So there are cases, there are situations where women have been in power, and we could mention others. I don't want to forget all of them. I'm just trying to say that these do exist and have existed, and influence has been there. But there is a male domination, and I do want to recognize that. I want to deny that. There has been a male domination of many societies going back, cultures, civilizations, societies going back millennia. I don't want to deny that, but there have been women in power, and at certain points in time that could affect things. And another thing. So I'm giving a bunch of anecdotes here to kind of fulfill this thing that we could actually approach this in some ways. There's also like people always say, English is easy to learn because it's not. English is easy to learn because it's simple and it's not complicated. That's true, folks. Just read the poem, English is tough stuff. I've been citing this poem for 30 years. I've been citing this poem. It was actually written by an Austrian, if I recall correctly. And it's tough. I mean, as a native speaker, you try doing that one. And if you can get every single word pronounced without looking it up and looking up how to pronounce it, I mean, good luck, folks. I've struggled with it. And I'm born and bred and I lived in the States for my first 23 years, and I didn't speak other languages. Well, I did when I did the language degrees, but it's tough. It's tough. I will recognize it's tough. Okay, English is tough stuff. Now, the one thing about English though is you got to learn each individual word, and there are some rules, but there are a lot of breaking the rules than not, because of the history of the English language, which I'm not going to go into all the details of the Great Vowel Shift in the Middle Ages, because I could talk about that one too. because yes, I did historical linguistics on phonology, both medieval French and medieval English. So I don't want to get into that because we'll be going all day here. But the the issue about, does English have gender? Now, people always said English doesn't have gender. So the Romance languages have it, or Latin-based language, we're going to call it, and a lot of other languages have gender, and even have some neuter. And so you got German has the neuter, and then you start getting to really complex situations. Like Finnish has 16 different declensions. I mean, this gets really fun to learn. Okay. And I got friends that have married into with Finns, and they say stuff. Linguists have married with Finns, and they said this is a challenge one. But all languages are difficult. But does English actually have gender? Now, there's a whole thing about this debate, and I say yes, it does, but it's very limited. And the things that I challenge you on to think about is that guitarists always refer to a guitar as she. It's always she. Okay. And even women will do this in guitar groups too. But it's kind of depends. And you have some people say, no, my guitar doesn't have I want to call her her or something, or they give them names. Actually, a lot of guitarists give their guitars names, not just the model number. And it'll be a female name. Males tend to do this, and you can see this in guitar groups. You can't deny this. And females will sometimes actually do the same thing. They give the guitar a female name too. Now, what does that copy after is boats. What boats are actually female names. Tend to be a female name. And that's historical too. And then think about cars. People tend to they refer to it as a she. And like motor vehicles, trucks is another thing. I'm not a pickup driver. I didn't ever had a pickup, but cars and boats and guitars tend to have female names. So their gender does exist, but in a different way. And it's about objects, but specific types of objects, which are usually accompanying objects. It's an accompanying object. It's like a companion. A guitar is a companion. A car is a companion. And motorcycles. Okay, motorcycles are companions. And again, this tends to be a male thing. A male thing that has. I had motorcycles, and I never called them the she. Okay, I had two of them. I called them my Suzuki 750 and my Honda 500. Okay, and I've had guitars, lots of guitars, and I never called them she. Well, I don't think so. No, I'd call them. I didn't. I have to say it's she in French because guitar is female. I don't want to say female gender. It is what is considered female gender in French. So yes, I call it she, but I never name my guitars with a female name, and I never, in English, ever refer to it as she. But I have to in French because of the gender, which is considered feminine. But it's not because of the feminine nature that it's not that makes it a female for me, okay, or a female gender. So there are actually in English we have this gender thing, right? And it's gender-ish, okay? Because these people give female names, which are usually attributed to females, to these objects. So that's a really interesting thing to consider. Going down that path. Whereas it's not like gender, which may be a le or a la or los or el or an una, uno, whatever you wanted these things. All these different things in these different languages, okay? Which can have, the sound can actually indicate the gender. I want to be careful the gender thing. If it's considered masculine and feminine, like ah and oh, or that comes out a lot in that kind of thing. So what I'm coming down now to is how do we deal with this? And again, there's a mixture of this. There's a mixture of linguistics. There's a mixture of linguistics and syntax and grammar, and you got to make a distinction between syntax and grammar too, because syntax is actually the official name, and what it is, and then you start doing syntactic, analysis. Grammar is kind of a layman's term, which is used very used across education and politics, um, to explain a mixture of things, which is morphology, and usually a lot of this gender stuff, or I want to say gender, is part of morphology of syntax, which is kind of a separate subdomain of syntax within linguistics. And yeah, I taught all this stuff, so I do know this stuff pretty well. Um, but the thing that I want to challenge us to think about and to really push us to go to, how could we actually deal with this? And I haven't covered all the different types of languages, and I'm not even going to get into how I deal with like Swahili and how I deal with this actually in Creole languages, kind of like I'm kind of a specialist in. So how do you deal with that there too, and how do you deal with like languages like pronouns and some clitics, and how do you deal with these things, and how do you do the anaphora and cataphora of referring to people, places, and things that are behind precedence or in kind of coming along, you're going to refer to afterwards. Anaphora and cataphora. I mean, there are all kinds of things I could spend. I'm already at 20 minutes here, and I could spend a lot of time going into details. I'm trying not to, but I'm trying to kind of get us a feeling of this. Maybe how can we move in a direction where we could deal with this? Now, in linguistics, and especially in lexical semantics, okay, so in the semantics area, which is meaning, there is a whole thing about, I got to make sure I have my phone here. I don't want to keep my phone behind me because it's charging, and I don't want to, I'm in the restaurant, I got to be careful here. So the thing that I want us to think about here for the linguistics aspects of this is that there are, and if we take the lexical semantics, partially of that approach, and that's usually when you're doing lexical semantics, you're talking about traits of being plus or minus of a trait. You take a trait and you say it's a plus or minus of that name, that label. Okay, that's usually how this works. So like a bird is plus wings or minus wings, or plus eggs or minus eggs, that kind of thing. These you have traits that you try to say plus and minus, and based on a trait. And so that helps kind of categorize things together. And I don't want to get into all the whole thing about semantics and then lexical semantics and get into all the details of how you do that. And you can do this in phonology too. Phonology does the same thing. You take a trait and it's plus or minus usually. You try to do that as much as you can, rather than give it two names all the time, which is masculine and feminine is two different names, right? So actually in linguistics, there is the concept of markedness. Markedness, being marked. The female trait is usually the unmarked, I got to get this right here, unmarked value of the trait. And the male equivalent of gender on nouns is usually considered to be a marked trait, or plus value of markedness, which means that the female value is by default. Okay, that's what that means. The female value, what this means is that the female, or the unmarked value is the most default one that is across the language. And then when you begin using the plus value of markedness, it tends to be the less typical or less frequent value. So that's why you're going to find a lot of nouns in certain languages that are female. I want to call them female because they're unmarked. That have a lot of rules that you can apply to them, and you might have some male gender nouns that are marked, plus value of marked, and they're the ones that go ahead and have. They tend to be very specific rules for that kind of thing. This, sorry, I got some people wrapped my right here, but they're all kind of moving around and getting tables and stuff and all that. So again, I got better lighting here than I have at home, or in a car. You'd be complaining because you'd say, "Oh darn, I can't see the guy." So this would be a way to consider this and approaching this as the markedness trait. But of course, that starts getting geeky. It's kind of like, oh, now we got to start. Now, we've been using masculine and feminine for like the past 500 years of writing books in different languages about language. And we've been taking up masculine and feminine the whole time, and neuter. Okay. So now we have to change the culture saying, hey, you got to stop talking about masculine and feminine. But now it's actually a good time to do it because it's like we want to be inclusive and not have to deal with masculine and feminine. We want to avoid this whole thing. So this is kind of time to say, hey, why don't we bring out the markedness thing? The markedness thing. But markedness sounds like total geeky stuff, and who's going to do this? So using the word markedness or mark is not a good approach because no one's going to like this. This is going to like now if we can use something kind of hype, use some other hype things that are happening, like social media right now are what happens. So we could say tagged, right, instead of marked. That would work because you tag things, right, with hashtags. So that could actually, sorry, using the word tagged. Now, it doesn't quite work so much because this is untagged. Yeah, maybe it could be. Something is untagged and it's just forgotten. You have to worry about it. But if you tag it, if it's tagged, you have to actually manually think about it and make it visible. This would be kind of ways to get around this by using other words that are a little more familiar, but they're going to kind of disappear anyways in their the hype cycle of using these things anyways. But so I think there are ways to kind of look at this and deal with it, and try to introduce the concepts that we've got in semantics, um, you know, different aspects of linguistics, theoretical linguistics. I think that it could be used. It just has to be adapted to culture, society, to for it that because you can't impose like we're going to use linguistic rules right now because this is just won't work. People will say no, this won't work. I agree, it won't work in that kind of way, but it's possible to do this if you do something that sounds cool, and it fits the cultures, and well, it's got, and this is more than one culture. You got to get to something like universal here, folks. So this is tough, and we haven't gotten to how we deal with neuter. What do you do when you got these other genders that are not masculine and feminine, but they're neuter? There's kind of this other one. Well, there are other ways to do this, and I don't. I'm brainstorming here. I don't have this. I haven't thought about all this detailed stuff. The unmarked and markedness stuff I knew about. So because I've worked in linguistics, so I've taught linguistics, so I know this, studied, so I do know. But I haven't thought about how to do this at a higher level, at a more wider scale. Maybe others have thought about it. They maybe thought about it. Maybe they haven't. But there are ways to consider. Um, this is not something that can be answered in one day. Politics gets involved. Education. This is a grassroots. You gotta get the thing going, and you gotta get people to adopt it and buy into it, and this is sales marketing techniques, so which usually linguists are not very good at. So they're more into you have to follow this rule because we've got some minister of education to do this, and so but that's all so much behind the scenes lobbying to make this happen. Whereas I'm not in. I don't think that trying to lobby it that way. You just do something grassroots, picks up, people like it, and then it just happens, and you use it. And you put in some technology, and it's like it's all there, and people are using it. And then they say, "Oh, we're doing it already." Um, so I think that these things can be done, but it just needs a lot of really needs some background thinking about it, some strategy, and it might not work. It might not work. It could backfire. Okay, I'm being honest here. But hey, I'm willing to think about it, have fun about it. This is the fun of bringing linguistics into society. George Fassel just wrote a great book about sociolinguistics where he started it and said it's all about the sociology of language. Um, and George's a great guy, and I've worked on some stuff too. And so, but there are some the really good sociolinguists out there that really studied this well, and it's and I'm really glad to have been taught by some of them and have read a lot of their books and have followed many things they've done, and I've only none of the sociolinguistic stuff that I've done has ever been new. The sociolinguist aspect, a couple little things like my former lexical language thing and all that kind of stuff, but the all this is available, and you start looking like code mixing and code switching and stuff, and how you do this. And this is all. There's some great stuff that we just need to benefit from to how to approach this and deal with this gender thing, okay, and how to give it a different name, rebaptize it under another concept, so that doesn't give this female male thing. We could refer to elsewhere. Get them the people to adopt it. That's another question. And this is not going to be easy. Okay, this will not be an easy thing to do. But it's a challenge, and hey, it's always going to be a challenge. And believe me, changing all this stuff, all the inclusive language stuff, like taking the words like whitelist and blacklist and trying to get that all changed, believe me, that's a big task in a company. Or the whole thing of the words of master and slave is a really big stuff to do. And I even struggle with this, like when I have to talk about words. Like I had to talk about master list of a master list of an Excel sheet with all the different categories. Can I say that word or not? I get a computer. Oh, can I say this master? Because it's actually got a meaning that isn't referring back to this literal base meaning, which is now that's being outlawed and prohibited for good reasons because of history. But then you start doing overkill, and you start we call this hyper adapting it, or I have another word too. It's called hypercorrection. Hypercorrection means you try to change things that actually don't need to be changed because you're applying it too many places. And so we do risk in playing the hypercorrection game with inclusive language, which itself is not a good thing to do, because then you can't say the word black anymore for like the word black hole, or something like that. This is just like nuts. It's just we're not going to find an alternative for the word black hole, right? Because a black hole is a black hole. And actually, it's a black hole because there's no light in it. So you can't give it another name unless you want to invent this whole other thing, and we're going to be going around in circles forever. So that's kind of not good, getting to or whatever. Or like people are saying you can't say black eye anymore, or you get punched and you have a black eye. Well, kind of depends on the color of what point in time it's black or blue, right? And so it tends to get worse as the colors start mixing because the colors mix together, they become black because of the combination of all the colors, right? So that's, we don't want to change names of colors now. We could get around this by changing the name of all the colors. Then we wouldn't have to worry about it anymore, right? We could call it pale and dark. But then then you got to get in the whole Dark Vader, right? And Darth Vader, and it's actually Dark Vader in other languages. So we'd get into this whole kind of debate that we will never get out of this thing. It'll be spiraling up and spiraling down because we're kind of getting worried about, giving negative connotations constantly. And, that's life. That's how life is. Not everything's positive, folks. Not everything's positive. Some things have negative connotations for good reasons. And that's the fun thing about language. It's just so fun. You just have to be careful not getting shot at by doing some of the stuff that you want to do. And I have to be careful even when I start doing these videos about what I'm going to say. I got to think about this. And so so that's kind of my thoughts. And yeah, it took about 30 minutes, a little over 30 minutes to talk about. But hey, this is not something you do in like 3 seconds. So you got to give a bunch of stories, got to explain a bunch of anecdotes to be able to build up the story, to explain how to do it, and then you say what are maybe the possible, outcomes of trying to deal with this gender language issue or debate or whatever you want to call this thing. So thanks for listening. Thanks for your comments back. And this is an ongoing debate and dialogue. This is great to have this kind of dialogue to do it. And this is just the unfortunate thing is I could do this monologue video to be able to say it, and then people can have this dialogue back and in text writing or back videos back, whatever, comments in the video or whatever. It doesn't matter. But it matters we have the dialogue and we move forward and think about it and talk about it. So thanks for listening.